Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, konnichiwa from Japan. This is Sriram, President of Thai Japan, and I am delighted to bring you a wonderful session to talk about how the startup ecosystems of India and Japan can collaborate. And to have a discussion on this, I have two eminent people who are perfectly qualified to have this conversation. Let me first introduce Mr. Tatsuya Terazawa. Many of you, if you are from the IT industry in India, you would know who he is. But let me take the liberty of introducing him. Until very recently, he was the Vice Minister at METI, which is the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. And currently, he is a special advisor to the Minister, advising the Minister on a variety of things. I have had the fortune of interacting with him for many years now, first when I was in the IT industry, and then subsequently on doing some work in the startup space. He is absolutely a super thinker about strategic stuff, a very firm believer that India and Japan should work together, not only for the betterment of the two countries, but for the entire global landscape, if you will. He has always been sought after to solve very complex problems. For example, when Japan went through a horrible earthquake, he was a very, very key person to figure out how should the country respond. When global financial crisis happened, he was very instrumental in figuring out what should be the policy response. And I have seen what he has done for India, be it opening up the Japanese labor market in terms of getting skilled folks from India. He was very instrumental in creating that program where skilled Indian people can come to Japan. So all in all, a big supporter of Japan, of India, and as I mentioned, somebody who really thinks through issues both from a strategical point of view and from an operating point of view. Welcome, Terazawa-san.
Thank you very much.
I have a well-known person. Folks in India will know. Not much of an introduction needed. He's on TV almost every half an hour, I think, these days. I have Mohandas Pai with me. So I have known Mohan for many, many years now because we were colleagues at Infosys. After leaving Infosys, he has done multiple things. He runs funds, he manages funds of funds, he was a founder trustee of Akshaya Patra, he's on multiple committees in SEBI, RBI, you name it. He's on the advisory board of NIIF. He was chairman of Manipal. I think his biodata is like 3 pages long. I actually printed it. Then I said, I can't read the whole thing. That'll be the entire session. And one extraordinary thing about Mohan, he's a big believer of India-Japan relationship is super crucial for both the countries. And I have personally seen him come to Japan multiple times before Corona to try and evangelize this concept that India and Japan should work together in a number of areas. And some of it has come to fruition, and we will talk more about this. So those are the two people. Welcome, Mohan. Good to have you.
Thank you.
In the conversation. So let me start off with a very, very simple question. Mohan, what's happening in the startup world in India?
Well, the startup world is beginning to take off again. In the first quarter of this year, which is April, May, June, it was a lull because people were scared. We were under lockdown, and many believed 25-30% of startups will die. That didn't happen. When we came out of lockdown, to a pleasant surprise, we found that the digital world has rebounded. The world has changed. India has changed. Everybody has gone digital. And all the startups who were in the digital world saw the revenues go up 2x, 3x in a matter of 6 months. Because, when a nation changes its habit almost overnight and finds that you can get almost anything done in the digital world, and there are apps, there's an ecosystem, there is telecom, there is network, etc., and they shift and change the behavior because that's the way to be, then you see an explosion of, digital work happening, and many startups were very, very fortunate. Maybe 4 to 5% of startups didn't make it, but that's okay. They were weak anyway. But what happened, Sriram, is so many of the startups came up with survival plans. I'm amazed at these young people who came with the survival plan to cut their costs, cut what money they take home, reduce the fixed costs, go on survival mode, reconfigure the technology, and focus on customer delight, and then grow. They change everything, and now they're all benefiting. And lastly, we have seen an upsurge in funding. The venture capital industry is now funding the winners very clearly, and they started funding the challengers, who are many young companies. And I've seen in the last maybe 3 to 4 months, maybe 1,000 companies come up, and maybe 300, 400 get funded. And if you look at the pipeline for funding for this quarter, next quarter, it is enormous. India today has 40 unicorns. The last time I counted, which is last week. I think this week we may see another 1 or 2. I just read about it. And by the time March comes, you could have 45 unicorns. So a target of 100 unicorns by 2025, we will overachieve. But we do have a problem of capital, and that is a big issue. And that's why I think Japan, India is extremely important. We'll talk about it later. But I'm very happy that the startup industry has bounced back, and we're seeing very good prospects and great growth.
Well, that's very good news, and it's a good way to end the year on a positive note after going through this pandemic. Let me ask Terezawa-san. I think the startup ecosystem in Japan, because I live here, I think is a very well-kept secret from the rest of the world. What's happening? People who live here like me, we see some absolutely phenomenal companies in the Japanese ecosystem, but somehow it is like a very well-kept, manuscript hidden away from the rest of the world. What's really going on in the startup world in Japan?
Well, I think the stereotype about the Japanese ecosystem for startups will probably consider Japan is so weak in the ecosystem to develop startups. And it could have been true in the past, but it is dramatically changing, as Sriram-san is saying. Not too many people have noticed the change, but the changes are taking place. I will give you 4 data points. One is that the fundraising by startups has increased by 7 times in the past 7 years. The number of IPOs has increased by 4 times in the past 8 years. And the annual number of IPOs is larger than 90 in Japan, which is certainly smaller than the number in the US. It's about 1/4 of the number of IPOs in the US. So it is not as great as the US, but coming at 1/4 of the number of IPOs in the US, I think compared with the past, it is a major improvement in our IPO activities. The third, I did the checking, and I myself was surprised. I picked the number, I checked the recent numbers for unicorns in Japan. That $1 billion bar is a very delicate bar, so the number would change depending upon the timing. But if we pick the most recent timing, prior to the COVID-19, for sure, the number of unicorns in Japan amounts to 21. And these unicorns were created within the past 10 years. You might be surprised. I was surprised. I thought
Fascinating.
I was thinking the number of unicorns in Japan would be like 3 or 4. But with careful look at the number of unicorns, prior to this COVID-19, as I said, the number is 21, which is quite remarkable. Smaller than the 40 or 45 that Mohan just mentioned, but compared with the stereotype about Japan being so anti-startup, this number would show that Japan is changing rapidly. The fourth number I would tell you is that the Japanese universities have been considered as ivory towers, anti-startup, anti-entrepreneur. That has been also the stereotype with regard to the universities like the Tokyo University and other well-known Japanese universities. But it is also changing. In the past 4 years, more than 500 startups originated from universities in Japan. So these numbers would show that somewhere under the radar, things are changing rapidly in Japan. And to add to the developments that we are seeing in the ecosystem of Japan for startups, there's a new prime minister in Japan, Prime Minister Suga, who came to power in September. And he has set up 2 major directions for his economic policy. One is to promote the so-called green innovation and to aim at a carbon neutral by 2050. This is the one pillar of this economic policy. The other is promote the digital revolution in Japan. His focus now is on digitalizing the government, but certainly he wants to digitalize our society. So now with the developments, as I explained, that is taking place in the ecosystem in Japan under the radar screen, which is developing very rapidly. Now we have the Prime Minister pushing for digital revolution. So the combined approach from the top, from the Prime Minister, pursuing digital revolution, and the development that we are seeing in the ecosystem to develop startups. If these are combined, we would have a major push for startups in Japan.
Fantastic. I am so encouraged to hear this. These numbers are awesome.
Awesome.
The question really is, would this ecosystem be for Japan, by the Japanese, only for the Japanese, or is there a larger vision which says, let's go figure out how can we transform societies elsewhere as well, just like the manufacturing did in the 60s?
Well, it's a great point, and we have come to recognize that to harness the potential of IT revolution, we cannot do it alone. In particular, relatively speaking, we lack the pool of excellent, capable software engineers. And that is the reason why I myself was personally involved in opening up our borders for talented engineers. I think the stereotype would tell many of you, Japan is so close against foreigners. We had a history of 300 years of closing our borders to foreigners when we had the samurais governing our country 200 years ago. But that stereotype still exists among many people.
That's a long time ago.
That's a long time ago. But that stereotype was there in Japan until very recently. But by recognizing that we cannot participate in this digital revolution by Japanese alone, I personally participated in the efforts to opening up our borders for talented engineers. I'll give you some examples. We have now issued a special visa for foreign entrepreneurs. We welcome foreign entrepreneurs to start up their business in Japan. And we also welcome foreign engineers to come to Japan. For the qualified engineers, we have a point system. So those engineers that qualify for a preferential treatment, we will be issuing the H-1B visa, equivalent visa in Japan in a matter of 10 working days.
Wow.
There is no quota as we see in the US, no quotas. And there's no requirement to prove that there is lack of domestic alternatives. And also the spouses are welcome to work as well.
Oh, that's massive.
So with my understanding, Japan has probably the most generous now, the immigration system, visa system for talented engineers. And for those engineers, if they like Japan, we welcome them to stay in Japan for a very long period of time. In the United States, you have the green card system, which is an envy of the world. But now in Japan, for those qualified engineers, after 1 year of stay in Japan, they can apply for a green card in Japan, just 1 year. So I think Japan is probably the most open country by now for talented engineers. This is another change in the stereotype. Japan is no longer a closed country against foreigners. It has changed dramatically. And we believe that we cannot do this alone. We want Indian engineers, we have other engineers coming from other countries to come to Japan and also come to Japan to start up their business. So I hope I answered Sriram's question.
More than convincingly. So Mohan, why is the Indian ecosystem not taking advantage of this?
Sriram, India is willy-nilly connected to the United States in a very, very big manner right from the 70s, when many Indians went there to study and started working. Silicon Valley has more than 1 million software engineers out of 6 million, and 2 million work for American companies in India. So the dream here is to go to the US. The US brand equity is extremely strong. We have a massive number of US companies setting up shop here. So from Bangalore to SFO, we seem to be having a similar culture. We don't feel at home in Delhi, honestly, from Bangalore. I'm sure from Hyderabad too. We don't understand the culture of Delhi. We find very strange what is happening in Delhi. But we're very happy to be in the valley and understand that. So that's very, very deep. It's very easy to go. We get Indian food. Flights are okay. We managed to get that B1 visa. H1B is a problem. There is some anti-engineer thing going on with President Trump. Hopefully that will end. So Japan, like Teresawa-san said, was not known to be open to overseas talent to come. And the Japanese market, even for companies like Infosys, has been very small over a period of time. You have spent 21 years in Japan, in Tokyo, and it has not grown very well. So now what Teresawa-san has done in creating the Indo-Japan partnership, and that includes creating the new kind of visas, will be a landmark event that will change the context in the next 2 or 3 years. Because what he's saying, about 21 unicorns was not known. 500 companies from the universities is not known. The quantum of funding that is raised is not known. Like you said, the best kept secret. Both of us have branding problems. We have a branding problem of a different sort, and Japan has a branding problem of a different sort. Even though they're moved and they're open and they're very good society, somehow people think that people are not welcome there, even though they had 32 million tourists come there, I think last year. It's a very remarkable society. Now that is open, we need more people-to-people engagement. We need Teresawa-san to come to India, go on a roadshow and popularize what he's saying. Because, people should know that. And then we need more Japanese startups to come here, Japanese companies to come here, etc. And Sriram, staying in Japan is a very friendly place for anybody who comes there. I mean, of course, for Indians, there's Indian food too, a lot of Indian restaurants, we know that, and comfortable place to stay. So I think it's just a question of pushing the narrative, creating the narrative, and we find that the Japanese, as a people, are shy of publicity. They don't brand themselves. They're very shy and they keep away, which is maybe part of the culture. But now I think we need people like Teresa-san to be more aggressive, to talk more, write articles in the media, and you must write articles about Indian startups in the media there, create a media connection. Because if you look to Nikki Sekai, they only write negative articles about India all the time. Well, I get it every single day. Now we must get a positive narrative. I think the key is the narrative. Once the narrative is there, it will be set. And lastly, Sriram, people don't know, the Japanese have invested $8 billion in the country, in startups. 6 billion by startups, that we know. 2 billion has come from other companies. And Teresawa-san has initiated the Indo-Japan, fund of funds of about $200 million, 125, 130 has come. So I think it's done a lot, but we have to push the narrative and create this narrative. That is the challenge.
Okay. So what you're saying is, if there is enough information dissemination, if there is enough branding, it is possible to make Japan also in the preferred set of, countries that our young entrepreneurs will look at.
Yes.
Would that be a fair statement to make? So
I think that's a fair statement to make. It'll take maybe a couple of years because people have to visit. We need more flights. There's supposed to be a flight of JAL to Bangalore and one of, other Nippon Airways to Chennai. Unfortunately, COVID put it away. Hopefully it will start. When the Olympics start, and I hope it starts in the summer, next year summer, there are more flights. We'll see a profusion of Indians going there. We have to capitalize on that and create this kind of excitement and narrative.
Okay, so let me just give one last comment. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, since Mohan pointed out the Japan-India partnership, I would like to explain the intention behind this partnership. When I was the Director General for IT policy at Medi, I thought about how could Japan compete with the giants, tech giants in the US or China. And it was a very big challenge for me. And the only conclusion I got was that Japan cannot do it alone. We had to look for a partner or an ally to compete globally in the digital world. And our biggest weakness then and now is that we are lacking a number of good software engineers. That is our weakness if we are to compete in the IT digital world. And I look for a possible partner. And I came to notice that India has abundance of software engineers, which is not a surprise to you, but for us it was a discovery. And I thought about the future. That yes, as Mohan said, India has had a very strong tie with Silicon Valley. That's true. We don't have that. But that partnership between the Silicon Valley and India was very effective when IT was limited to the virtual world. If you were just focused on the internet, that was fine. And software solved everything. So the Silicon Valley India partnership was excellent if IT was limited to just the internet or the virtual world. But with the IoT, the merger or marriage between the virtual world and the real world, you have to have strength in the real world as well. With all due respect to the Silicon Valley is strong on the virtual side, but not necessarily that strong on the real side. Japan, with the established tech companies in Japan, we are very strong on the real side and the hardware side. So for us to compete in the digital world, especially in the IoT, when we have the marriage between the software and the hardware, the virtual world and the real world, the combination of Japan, who is strong on the hardware side, the real side, with India, strong on the virtual side, on the software side, would lead to the excellent partnership, which would enable both India and Japan to compete better in this global world, in the IoT community, IoT revolution. And that is the reason that 2 years ago, in October of 2018, when Prime Minister Modi visited Japan and met with the then Prime Minister Abe, the two leaders agreed on the Japan-India digital partnership. So this partnership has been led by the two leaders. And our current Prime Minister Suga-san has been the number 2 person supporting Prime Minister Abe, so he will certainly inherit this partnership. The challenge for us is how to put substance under this partnership agreed by the two leaders. And I'm very optimistic that we can put substance to this partnership. And the fund of funds that was mentioned by Mohan is the key pillar to support this partnership. And I'm really happy to describe this fund of funds.
Super. Thank you very much. You know, I have always maintained this. If India and Japan can get together, it's a great way to create the next, standard in the IT software world. You know, today America dominates the standards. China has got its own stuff, but that's within their own country. And I'm not sure if those standards are, welcomed by the others. I think we have a very unique opportunity where by combining the technology prowess of both sides and the large market that is India and Japan, it is possible to drive a standard. Yes, Mohan, you wanted to say something before I go to the next segment?
Sriram, the Japan-India partnership is strategic for both of us, extremely strategic. Let me explain. The US is a very large digital world. The biggest monopolies in the digital world are in the United States. Google, Facebook, huge trillion-dollar companies. China has its own monopoly as a very big market. They've been investing. They're investing $150 billion in AI by 2022, and they may overtake the United States in AI and data because they got a huge data. Now, these are the two big giants in the world that we have to face. Now, like Teresawa-san said, India by itself is hitched to the United States. We are a force multiplier for the United States. We have created our own market, but our market is possibly in size 3 to 4 years behind China and maybe 4 to 5 years behind the United States. We lack the capital to grow, and our economy is only $3 trillion, maybe going to $5 trillion by 2026, maybe 10 by 2031, but we have a long way to go. China is already $15.5 trillion, Japan is $5 trillion, and the United States is $21 trillion. So right now, we we don't want to be stuck between these two big giants who want to set the template for the world. So if both get together, Japan with its fantastic manufacturing, great technology in the real world, like Terazawa-san said, which is high-tech, which is very sophisticated, highly automated. India with its prowess in the digital world, with the startups coming up in this country, enormous amount of engineering talent, enormous amount of coding talent, and a very growing market. And India is becoming a digital nation like no other nation in the last few years after Prime Minister Modi's famous speech in Independence Day in 2015, where he spoke about digital India. Now, we both come together. Look at the magic. We have a great country, which is an industrial power with enormous amount of engineering talent in the real world and engineering capacity, big companies, great companies with great research, huge amount of capital. Japan's savings of $15 trillion, 3 times the GDP. And India, an emerging market, becoming digital, a huge market with huge amount of talent and high growth. We both come together and we work with the United States because India, the United States are linked together. Look at it, we can create magic. We can set the terms for the whole world. Japan, India, the United States, like you said, can be the standard bearer for the whole world. I mean, Europe will join with us. So we can be the standard bearer for that 6.5 billion people, 6.5 billion people who are outside China. And the world will trust us. The world will trust us because we are not hegemonic. We don't want to dominate. We want to work with them. And we are a very open society. Japan has become so open, welcoming to great talent. India is so very open. We can just walk in and we see what is happening. For example, 90% of the capital coming into startups in India is from overseas. And it's a very welcome society, right? And the US is very welcome. The three of us join together, magic. We can change the world. And nothing else does. But Sriram, I want to say this. It's very, very important that Japan and India have to come together, both countries. The United States is going to dominate whatever happens. It's a fantastic society. China will dominate by sheer flow of capital, the Road and Belt Initiative, putting money into Africa, $1 trillion, etc. So what is left of the world? We don't want to be dominated by any other society. We want to grow, and it's available here. So we have to do big things. That's why this Prime Minister Modi's and Prime Minister Abe of creating this digital partnership is at the core of the strategical growth of both these countries. And in Southeast Asia, they're all waiting for Japan and India to come together because they want competition. There are a lot of Chinese companies going there. They want Japan and India to come together, and that market is open. It's a GDP of maybe $2.5 trillion. Just imagine. The possibilities are immense. We have to jump at it. We have to go. And I do hope Terazawa-san will come here every month and talk to people, and we'll go there and we'll make it work.
Okay, let's get down to how do we get this done. So one of the things you mentioned, Mohan, was capital from Japan. So Terazawa-san, I know we made a very small beginning with this fund of funds. Would you like to give the audience a little flavor of what that is and what is the purpose, thinking behind it, and how do we scale that?
Well, actually, it was not my idea. It was the idea of Mohan, who came up with this idea of this fund of funds. I vividly recall at one dinner, Mohan asked me to come closer to him, and he wrote sort of image on the back of a napkin about this fund of funds concept. I think it was about two years ago. And that was the start of this process. And I think it was his idea that there's a logical, strong rationale for Japan and India to get together jointly to develop startups. But I think one of the challenges is that we don't know each other very well. Indian people know a great deal about Silicon Valley, but very little about Japan. Japan also, Japanese know a lot about the US, not necessarily Silicon Valley, but New York and Washington, D.C., but not necessarily India. So we had to bridge this gap from the logical rationale with the reality of understanding between the two countries. And to make that first step or bridge, it is better to get to know as many venture capitalists and as many startups as possible. So this fund of funds was considered to be a mechanism to ensure that the Japanese investors, Japanese companies, would have access to as many venture capitalists as many startups as possible with a given amount of money. And I'm happy to share with you that a number of major Japanese financial institutions and corporations, non-financial corporations, have agreed and also already put their money into this fund of funds. The fund of funds has already been launched. The fund of funds has already actually invested in two venture capitals in India, and we are looking for more investment in venture capitals in India, which will lead to investment in startups in India. And we are also trying to expand furthermore the investors from Japan as well as from India. So I would encourage the audience today, if you are a venture capitalist or startups, if you believe that there is a potential for partnering with Japanese companies, and if you don't know the Japanese companies, one step would be to have association with this fund of funds. It's not just about getting the capital. You may get capital from other sources like the U.S. or China or Korea, whatever. But this fund of funds would provide just more than just money. It would provide access to Japanese financial institutions and Japanese non-financial institutions eager to find partners in India. So I would encourage the audience today to access this fund of funds. And Mohan would be the contact point, I think, to get access to the fund of funds. And this is just the starting point. I believe this fund of funds will be the platform based on which we can develop this Japan-India digital partnership into full scale.
So that's great. I think it's a fantastic news that there is actually some real stuff happening on the ground, and there is capital available for Indian GPs to take. Please do, look at it and see how you can leverage this. So, Mohan, how do we scale this? How do we scale this?
Well, Sriram, in fact, scaling up is happening because, the NIIF, National Investment Infrastructure Fund, the Government of India, which is the semi-sovereign fund of India, the Government of India is committed $3.5 billion. And right now, they promised another $1 billion. The cabinet approved that. Is looking at Japan very, very seriously and talking to many Japanese big institutions. And I think that will be the next big move because they too have a $800 million fund of funds that is there. And they want Japanese companies to come and invest in infrastructure. Because the key thing, like Teradawa-san said and I said earlier, how do you build the India brand in Japan? You need connections at different institutional level. You have it at the technology level. You have the companies like Fujitsu, NTT Data come here and work because they are the software providers for Japanese corporations. And then you need the big institutions like the Japanese pension fund to look at India, have an India location to work with the NIIF so that you have to create connectivity. And the big banks, just the other day, JICA gave $1 billion of guaranteed loan to the State Bank of India for a green fund. I mean, it's brilliant. The Japanese are the biggest investors in this country. They've given us more money than any other country in the world. But nobody knows this. The Japanese don't talk about it. They're very reticent. We don't talk about it. I don't know why we should talk about it. And Japan has been the most friendly country to us for the last 30, 35 years. They funded the majority of a metro system all across to solve our traffic problem. They funded the majority of it. I think it's very important to get that institutional connect. We need greater publicity, more flights, more visits. For example, Jethro has set up a startup center in Bangalore. It's been set up, COVID came, now we've got to activate that. We have to hold many events. Carnegie has a Tokyo-Bangalore partnership. They hold events, but every quarter we need events here, one event in Japan and Tokyo. We got to work together, one in Hyderabad, Bangalore, Hyderabad should work together. Maybe Bangalore, Hyderabad, Chennai, the golden triangle of technology in India can all work together. Thai can be Thai, of which you are heading in Japan, and India can work together as a partner to familiarize. NASSCOM is already doing it. So we got to do all that and get the big institution involved. And we need to write success stories. There are many success stories. We need to write about it. We only know SoftBank, but SoftBank is something very different from what Japan Inc. is. We'll do that. And next thing, Sriram, There's a very big strategic imperative before India and Japan now, which I know Teresawa-san is deeply interested. We must talk about it, 5G. The 5G standard is thought to be dominated by China. And there is a fear on the world about security and all of the challenges. So the Americans, the Europeans are very apprehensive about inviting somebody in 5G. Now, India too is going to open up its 5G. Japan has fantastic technology in 5G. The Japanese companies have not pushed forward because there was a big hegemon there who was competing with them and cutting prices. Now the market is wide open. And I think in 5G will be the perfect partnership between India and Japan, so that India and Japan work together for common standards, and the Japanese companies, their technology, the Indian companies, their technology, etc., can come together. And Teresawa-san will tell you, with 1.2 billion subscribers in India and 125, 130 million in Japan, we'll have the scale. And once we get the scale, we can go to Europe and compete. We can go to South America, compete. We can go to Africa and compete. Indian companies are in Africa. We can go to the United States and compete. The world is at our feet. So the 3G. So we got to create this 4-layer of strategic initiatives. NIF is fantastic. I hope that works in the next 2 or 3 months. And then the 5G, which I'm sure Teresawa-san can talk to us and tell us. And cyber security. Government to government, we must work on cyber security, because cyber security is a major, major issue for the entire world when the world becomes digital. We have to protect our countries. Cyber security policy on digital, digital residency, data privacy for individuals, etc. We need to have a global agreement to make sure that all our data globally is protected for individuals. So the many areas for Japan to India to work together and to lead the world. Because we got now with so much of data, all of us a piece of data. We want the data to be protected. India is going to have a law. I'm sure that Japan is going to have a law. There's a lot of work for policymakers like this. All this comes together next 6 months under Prime Minister Suga-san's digital partnership, which is wonderful. 2 big things, green and digital. Prime Minister Modi has also got the same thing, green and digital. It's a perfect marriage. We got to meet more often.
Super. So scale will lead to standard. Yes, Teresawa-san.
Okay, can I build upon Mohan's great speech? One thing about the capital is that, as Mohan said, we have an abundance of savings in Japan. And unfortunately, there's little destination for that saving to go in Japan. That is the reason why the zero interest in Japan has been there for probably more than 10 years and longer. Most countries experience that after the Lehman shock, but we have had this near zero interest for probably two decades. So compare with a situation in which in Japan, the return on investment is just 0%. India could provide an excellent opportunity for us to put our savings to yield higher return. To support our aging population, we need return. And we hope, and I expect that India can provide that opportunity. And that is one reason why among the major participants for this fund of funds, Nippon Life Insurance, our largest life insurance company, and actually the largest manager of assets for the pension, is a major player of this fund of funds. Actually, the GP of this fund of funds is a subsidiary of Nippon Life Insurance Company. And we also have Mizuho Financial Group joining as a major partner for this fund of funds. And Mizuho Financial Group is one of the 3 mega banks in Japan. So we have the 2 strong financial institutions in Japan who would have to manage the capital coming in as a major players for this fund of funds. So the participation or association with this fund of funds for the Indian venture capitalists and the startups would be a bridge towards the Japanese vast amount of capital available. So that's the reason that this fund of funds would have a very strategic importance behind this. Let me talk about 5G. As Mohan said, 5G would be very important as it would affect every aspect of our life. And we need to have a trustworthy supplier of technology to supply the infrastructure and manage the infrastructure. And trust is something very scarce these days.
Yeah, you got to earn it. It takes a while.
But it takes a while.
You can lose it very quickly, but it takes a while.
And that's the reason why we are looking closely with potential cooperation with the US and European countries so that we can develop trustworthy alternatives who can provide 5G network and infrastructure.
Thank you.
But having the US and Japan and Europe is not sufficient. Even if you add all the population of those three economies, the number of population is just 1 billion.
And we got 1.3 on our own in
Right.
India.
And China has
Right.
1.4 billion. So in order to ensure that you have a credible alternative, you need to have the size. Just saying no to some of the players would only give you a short-term fix. To have a long-term viability, you need to have size. And that's the reason why Japan, US, Europe, and India should work together so that we would have a credible source of technology for 5G and 6G and for the future, because technology for IT will be the basis for the future. And that's where we are looking forward to working with India. And for your reference, one of the a few advantages we have for 5G is that we have telecom companies smaller than some of the Chinese or the European companies, but they are still active. Companies like NEC or Fujitsu, they are still active in this telecom sector. And NEC has made a strategic decision. They will be a major supplier of 5G technology, especially on the open architecture way. There is an open architecture called ORAN, O-R-A-N, and this would drastically transform the way in which IT infrastructure could be provided. Rather than having a single vendor provide everything from top to bottom, the open architecture would allow several layers to enable many competitors to come in to provide that technology. ORAN can be a key to address the possible monopolization of the telecommunication market by a number or a limited number of untrustworthy players. But to make ORAN successful, we need to have a larger number of players in support of this open architecture. So that is also another reason why we need to work with India, and having an open architecture would, I believe, would be in the benefit of India as well.
Oh, that's very good to hear, because open architecture is the way to create scale, and scale is the only way to drive standards.
And excuse me, 2 more points.
Yeah.
Cybersecurity, Mohan mentioned, and I don't be explicit in this, but it is quite clear that India and Japan share the same strategic security concern. We have to defend ourselves against cybersecurity attacks. And in that regard, we need to work together, exchange information about the attacks so that we can better defend ourselves. And there is a strong common interest between India and Japan that we cooperate in cybersecurity. Data certainly is an important asset for the future. But without data, we cannot make our AI smarter. China has an advantage of having 1.4 billion of population with very little respect for privacy. That gives them a huge advantage in the AI race. How to compete with that? We need to have a larger data pool to make our AI smarter. India has 1.3 billion population. We have 125 million of population. If we can combine with each other, with other like-minded who we can trust, we would have a large enough data pool to enable that we can develop AIs together. So many aspects of digital partnership, whether it be 5G, whether it be startups, whether it be cybersecurity or data, there are many areas in which we can work together. And the beauty or the benefit of Japan and India to work together is that we trust each other. And I think we have total trust in India, you have a trust in Japan. The Japanese government does not intervene and look into the data. That's the trust I think we have, and that's the trust we have for India. A number of other countries, you cannot totally trust the governments in protecting the data. Only among trusted members you can share data. And I think the first step could be between India and Japan to share data between the trusted partners, so that we can develop AI in a much more better way.
Thank you. I thought I will not have enough questions and may not be able to, do my slotted 1 hour, but we're almost there. Let me ask two questions, and I have a question from the audience as well. Teresawa-san, how is the Startup Hub doing in Bangalore? What more can we do? Definitely as TAI, we would want to collaborate. In fact, we had a conversation earlier between TAI Singapore, TAI Japan, and TAI Bangalore, saying how do we as TAI catalyze the Startup Hub? What can we do? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, thank you very much for mentioning the Startup Hub. I was personally involved in setting up the Startup Hub in Bangalore, and I asked one of my colleagues at METI to be stationed in Bangalore. Visiting Bangalore once or twice a year is not sufficient. So I asked my young colleague to be stationed in Bangalore. His name, well, he is working for the JETRO's office in Bangalore. And he will be serving as the bridge between Japan and India. And if you have not seen him, Endo-san, please contact him. In addition to this fund of funds, there's another bridge, this Startup Hub in Bangalore. Please contact him, and he is the bridge between Japan and India. And with working with him, you'll be able to access more Japanese players. And that is very important to going over the gap that we have between India and Japan, not knowing each other well enough. And through this fund of funds and through the Startup Hub, that's the way to build that knowledge and understanding.
Super.
Sriram, I want to make a point here, another area. Financial services is a very, very big area around the world. Now, you'll be happy to know that the Reserve Bank of India has set up an innovation hub for all financial players to come and innovate and have new entrants, headed by Chris Gopalakrishnan. You know Chris very well, former CEO of Infosys. I had the Financial Technology Committee for SEBI, and SEBI has a sandbox where companies in securities area can come and work. And then IRDA, the insurance regulator, has his own sandbox. I mean, I'm surprised to know they've done very well. Now, these are the three big players who are working at the intersection of regulations and technology. And the National Stock Exchange has a fantastic technology center. So I think we must create a partnership between the Japan Stock Exchange and the National Stock Exchange to look at cybersecurity and others, because they all run big markets. We must have a arrangement possibly to share knowledge between the Bank of Japan, which is the financial services regulator, the financial service authority, the insurance regulator, etc., and the stock market regulator between Japan and India. So the regulatory level, people can come together and share information and share innovation, because we both can share innovation. Singapore has taken a lead by having that Singapore FinTech Festival, where 4,500 companies all around the world come there. It's happening right now in Singapore. I do hope that Japan will become the financial center for Asia. After Hong Kong is imploding because of certain action of a major player there, Japan is looking at becoming the global financial center. Maybe they will create a separate SEZ, separate SEZ like kind of mechanism where financial services players can come and work, and special laws will apply to them, and they can tackle the local market and the overseas market and attract the best talent in the world. So in the financial service area, Teresawa-san, there's a great opportunity to connect players together and be the lead in the world, along with maybe Singapore. So I think we must look at multiple layers coming together. You spoke about 5G, technology, fantastic. Cybersecurity, fantastic. IoT will be led by 5G, and Japan is going to dominate the IoT world because they got the best technology. China is a competitor, but Japan is a leader. So I don't know where to stop, Sriram. We can go on dreaming of the world that we're going to create because we both can come together.
Let me just ask Teresawa-san to respond on the financial services piece, because I know Japan is doing a lot of stuff to attract financial services talent. And they have done a whole bunch of stuff which was unthinkable, let's say, 10 years ago. Would you like to comment, Reza-san?
Well, it's a great point. And as Mohan said, with the recent developments in Hong Kong, there's a strong political push in Japan that Tokyo could be an alternative to Hong Kong. So in the most recent tax reform, we'll be changing our tax regime to attract foreign financial institutions to be located in Japan. Japan has been losing this in the past. In spite of the huge amount of capital available in Japan, we have not attracted the foreign financial institutions in Japan. But this is a golden opportunity that we can provide an alternative. And also, with the digital revolution affecting the financial sector, many financial institutions in Japan are eager to introduce the digital technology into their business. Mizuho Financial Group, as I mentioned, a major player in the fund of funds, they are eager to digitalize their financial service. So through this fund of funds, we hope that we can create a bridge between Japan and India to create the new types of financial system utilizing the digital technology. And also for those Indian tech companies, please come to Japan because we are eager to develop a financial new services utilizing the digital technology in Japan. One more point I forgot to mention in the past is that Japan has NTT. If you're not aware of NTT, please put it down in your memo. NTT is probably the only leading telecommunication operator with a very high level of R&D capability. In the past, several decades ago, AT&T had the Bell Lab, a leader in R&D, but with all the deregulation, Bell Lab went nowhere. So in the remaining mobile operators in the world, NTT is probably the only major mobile operator with the highest level of R&D. There are other companies like Verizon or AT&T remaining, but still NTT is the leader as a mobile operator with R&D. Even Huawei is envious of NTT. NTT has decided to tie up with NEC, as I mentioned. Oh. So we have the combination of NTT and NEC, and the combination of these two would provide a great advantage for India for their push for 5G. So we are looking forward to working with India, both in the financial sector as well as the telecom sector.
Super. I really got to wind up because the back room is pushing me to close the session. There is a question, so let me answer it in the interest of time. What are the different incubation offerings that an Indian startup can get in Japan? Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology has a fantastic incubation program. There are other incubation programs available in universities. I would encourage all startups to take a look at those, and I'm sure there are many more. So let me just wrap this up. It is very clear that the opportunity of collaboration is immense. Both sides need each other, be it 5G, be it cybersecurity, be it data security, data for AI. I think we all know what needs to be done. What clearly seems to be missing is increased communication levels to make sure that both sides know what each other has got. Continuous dialogue on the ground at institution to institution, government to government, to make sure that all of this comes together into an actionable plan. I think we should be very grateful as Indian people for all the investments that Japanese side is making in India, including things like Startup Hub. There's a whole bunch of programs where, they want to try and make sure that they leverage the Indian market or the Indian skill sets. So it's really up to us, members of TIE and the audience, to figure out how do we crystallize all of this and make sure that this collaboration happens. And we create a new world which is based on trust, which is based on equity, which ensures that everybody is prosperous, healthy, and happy. Thank you very much for joining this session. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sriram. Thank you, Reza-san. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.